This is one of the episodes from my India Diaries series, and as you can tell, I am back home again. But at the start of this year, I went on the most amazing 2-week textiles tour to Gujarat in India. And before I go and show you one of the parts of the tour, I just want to give a bit of an overview of what I was doing there, who I went with, and what these videos were all about. Now this little section is going to repeat on every video, so if you're watching the whole series, just skip to the end of this bit to get into that particular episode. But let me just give a bit of context. So I went on this textiles tour with a company that's run by a wonderful woman called Sian, and it's called South Asia Uncovered. She does a few little trips each year, but she's super focused on communities and ensuring you get to see a real authentic side of India. The reason I chose to go with her is that I had been recommended it by a customer who said to me, you just have to go do this trip. And the reason I went to Gujarat is all of India has textiles traditions, everywhere does, but Gujarat is the area which has the most embroidery. So that's the reason I went to Gujarat. Throughout the trip, we were accompanied the whole time by Sian, Tuhina, her colleague, who's also a guide, and then when we got into Gujarat, by our guide Pravin, and our driver, Pravin, both same names and nice and confusing, and they were with us the whole time. And I cannot tell you how much having them, with the knowledge they have, the relationships they had, the communities they know, and the experience and understanding to show us what's really important, it created the most incredible trip, so informative, and I really feel like we had an experience that we couldn't have had with anyone else. And that's why I kind of want to show you what we got up to on this trip, because she only runs this trip once a year and there are only 8 places, and so the chances are not everyone is ever going to be able to do this trip, and so I wanted to kind of share with you what we got up to. Now, a few little caveats on everything. I am sharing all the knowledge based on what we kind of were told when we were visiting certain places or from my own experience. I did not go and fact check when I was told something if that was right, so if there is anything that I say which is inaccurate, like by all means please comment, and I apologise for that. Secondly, I'm trying to pronounce everything as best I can, but sometimes the names of crafts and things, I am no good at pronouncing things even in English, let alone Hindi words, so forgive me for any mispronunciations, I'm trying my best. And then there are segments where I'm not going to show you certain things, such as when we go visit certain communities, because actually, these aren't a tourist attraction, they're showing us their crafts and things, but there's this issue of kind of over-tourism potentially affecting the way that lots of communities live, and so we have certain areas of the trip where we didn't want to film, but I'll talk to you about what happened, and hopefully that still gives you a real good context. Now the final thing is, these India Diaries are going to come up in a slightly different order to how I actually experienced it. So whilst we started in Mumbai, then went to Ahmedabad, then to Bhuj, travelled around all of kind of Kutch area from there, I'm actually starting the trip for you in the context of the videos from Ahmedabad, and I am going to come back to Mumbai in the very last video. And the final thing is, I was filming these on the go. I was filming them in hotel rooms, which is usually the best place to have actually a quiet background. And the days were incredibly full on, absolutely jam-packed with so much information, but I wanted to make sure I filmed them regularly, or else I'd forget aspects of the experience, aspects of the kind of people we met. And for my own sake, and for your sake, I didn't want to forget things. But inevitably what that means is sometimes I'm filming quite late at night when I'm a bit tired and slightly mad. I think there is one episode where I did it in my pyjamas. So forgive me also if I seem like a crazy person. I just wanted to make sure I really captured the emotions at that moment in time. So without further ado, I'm going to get stuck into the India Diaries, and I really hope you enjoy this series. Hi everyone, this is my last video diary that I am recording from India. Where I'm filming right now, there is a bit of an echo, and I've tried to move to different rooms or tried to pick somewhere really quiet, and this is the best I can do, so I'm sorry if the sound feels a little bit echoey on this video. It's the best we can do. So basically now I'm in Muli, and that is another area sort of Kutch, still within Gujarat, but we've come further south and we're heading back towards Ahmedabad because today we are flying back from Ahmedabad to Mumbai, and then tomorrow flying back from Mumbai back home. So this is my sort of last day of the trip. From this point on, we are now just traveling. So this is my last video diary, and I'm going to fill you in on actually the last 3 days that we've spent from Bhuj and then coming across to Muli. So where I last left you, we were in Bhuj, and we'd gone and we'd visited all these kind of really rural communities, and I told you about that. So we had one more day in Bhuj after then, and for that day we went to go meet a whole another set of communities. But this time I do have some footage I can show you from those days, because we were going to visit a place called Narona Craft Village, and as a village it's very known for all the various crafts that people do there. And so I'm going to kind of share a bit about some of the crafts we saw, and quite a few of these crafts are not textiles crafts, and it's really wonderful to see a range of crafts. That's what Sian's done so well on this trip, is that even though obviously this is a textiles tour, all of us on the trip have an interest in anything handcrafted, and so that's what we got to saw. So before we headed to Narona Craft Village, what we did do is our guide, who's been with us the whole time that we've been in Gujarat, Pravin, he is from Bhuj, and he was born in Bhuj, lived there all his life. He's very proud Kutchi, and he took us to see part of the city, because everything we've done so far has involved travelling out of Bhuj. We wanted to see parts of the city. Now, as I briefly mentioned on the last video, the city of Bhuj has had earthquakes, very severe earthquakes in the past, and the last one was in 2003, and before that was a very bad one in the 1950s, and around about every 50 years, there's small earthquakes, but around about every 40 or 50 years there's been major earthquakes, which has meant that a lot of the old buildings of the city are destroyed, partially destroyed, and have been over time. But what we went to go to see is the palaces of Bhuj. So first we went to go see the 16th century palace complex, which is called, reading these things so I get it right, Ainam Mahal. And this one is made up of 3 different palaces. So there's the original first palace, which is a kind of stone, beautifully carved stone palace. And then there's a second one, which was a white marble palace. And then a third one built, which was built in the 1930s, which was almost built in a sort of Italian, British style. And I'll show you the footage and you'll be able to see the difference between them. It's very evident what is the new palace and what is the old one. At the moment, the oldest one has been the most severely destroyed, and you'll see that from the footage. But you can still just make out all the kind of beautiful carvings sort of around the top, the trees of life, and every single tree of life that's carved is completely different. On the second palace, which is the kind of Italianate style palace, it looks from a distance almost like it's kind of in pristine condition. It's only when you get closer, and I'll try and show some footage of it, that you can see how damaged it is from the earthquake. And so you see the kind of clock tower, the bricks are all kind of coming apart, and it feels very almost quite treacherous. No one's going up there. And Pravin, our guide, he had actually been potentially the last person to go up that tower, because the evening before the earthquake, the major earthquake in 2003, he had been on with a journalist for National Geographic who they'd had a special kind of permission to go up the tower for filming purposes. And they came down that tower about 7 p.m. and probably no one has been up since. So that's really interesting to see. And then we went to the main palace. And in the main palace, as much as a lot of stuff was destroyed, what they've tried to do is bring together lots of the different artifacts that did survive the earthquake. So I'll show you bits of some clips from it. But these are just some photos because you can't take videos inside. So we did that in the morning, and then straight from there we headed to Narona Craft Village. And this village is pretty large, pretty substantial place, and is made up of loads of different crafts people. And what's quite interesting in the village is basically the further out on the edge of the village you are, this like kind of slightly lower down the craft is perceived. And so we worked our way inward. So we started at the outskirts of the village, meeting the lacquerware makers, and then we moved slightly closer in and we met the copper bell makers, and then we moved to the very centre and we met the Rogan art painters. And that kind of goes in almost like the order of how their craft is perceived internationally, nationally, in terms of how much people kind of view it as artisan. But they are all incredible crafts. So we start on the outskirts with the lacquerware makers, and at this point I didn't know it would be okay to take footage again, because you still are going into a family complex, you're still going into an environment, so I haven't really got any pictures particularly. So I'll show you a couple that other people on the tour group have kindly lent me, and my sister and my mum took, but of photos. But basically this process of lacquerware making, they hand carve various things, and nowadays they do a lot more kind of geared towards things that tourists might buy. So it's things like spoons and household implements. In the past, they would never have done lacquerware on things like household implements and utensils, because it's too high value an item to be used every day. So this kind of, the way they're applying the craft now is very much to make a livelihood rather than necessarily the way it would traditionally have been used. Traditionally it would have been used far more for kind of very precious items, like kind of jars for storing precious things in. So it would have been very highly regarded in the household. You would not be kind of serving out your dal with a lacquerware spoon. So we saw this process, and basically they carve the wood and then they make the lacquer using a sap from a particular tree. I think the neem tree was what they said. And so they go and they collect from the trees all the lacquer, and in months when they can, they also are collecting honey. So they kind of have two forms of income, from honey and then natural honey collection, and then also from collecting all the sap for lacquer. And then they mix that lacquer with pigments. And whilst historically they would have mixed it with natural pigments, you'll notice from the kind of colours of the lacquerware that today, in this day, they do not just use natural pigments, they're using a range of artificial pigments as well in order to achieve the very bright colours. So they mix the pigment in with the sap and they create these kind of blocks, almost they look like blocks of crayon. Then using a hand turning device, they basically have a turning thing, they will turn the wooden object and they press the block of crayon on it, and the heat of the turning wood combined with that puts the lacquer onto the item. So they put the colour on and then they set it in place using some oil, and then they finish it with kind of using a bit of soft wood to kind of remove any debris. Once it is done, it's very solid, but obviously because it's applied with heat, if you go and put one of these spoons on a hot stove, it is going to then melt again. But the patterns they achieve are just incredible. It looks like it's been marbled. It looks sort of almost an embroidery. It looks like Bargello. It's got those kind of classical patterns on it, which is all achieved by hand, from creating stripes and then using kind of oil in order to pull the colours together. And there is kind of just this family out on complex on the side of the village who are creating this, and hugely sort of need any support they can get. And actually often what ends up happening is when people visit Nerona, they tend to visit the kind of really highly regarded artisans right in the middle, and sadly the lacquerware community are not particularly visited on the outskirts, which is a real shame. And what it meant was when we left, all the kind of women and the children of the village all gathered out and formed almost this line, and were holding up all these beaded and kind of trimmed dolls and things they'd made, which were incredible. And so they are finding all these various ways in which to kind of be able to subsidise their income, retain their lacquerware heritage, but also bring other means in. And the pieces they're making were amazing. So we visited them. Then we went to go visit the copper bell makers. And I'll show you some footage from this. The chap who showed us how to make copper bells, I think he said he was 9th generation copper bell maker, but he's 81. And if you just look at the way he's sitting in these videos, like, I can't sit anywhere near like that. And the dexterity he has, the eyesight, everything is quite incredible. And his son and his grandson were both there, and they were saying, we trying to tell him that he doesn't need to do the demonstrations anymore, but he says to us, oh, if I just lie down and rest, like, what am I going to do? I'll be bored, so I would rather do the demonstration. So he very much wanted to be the person to show us how these copper bells are made. And so the copper bells actually are made of brass, and I'm going to show you the whole process here, but basically by hand, they hammer and create these bells of various sizes and everything. And the men of the family will create the bell. Then that goes over to the women of the family, and the women of the family coat the bells in a mixture of copper plus something else. And I'll ask a question if you want to know, and I'll try to do the research and find out what the other thing they mix it with is. But then they cover it in a mix of clay and cotton, waste cotton, so it kind of creates something quite fibrous, almost like they make it into kind of like a chapati shape, a kind of long, thin piece of clay. They entirely encase the bell in that, then they put it in a furnace, and then when it comes out the furnace, the whole thing is kind of coppered. So it's effectively kind of got a copper veneer round it. But that's what creates the irregularity in the surface finish, is the way that actually the copper is applied. Then once it's come out the kiln, they hammer it again. They attach the kind of fitting in the middle. They hammer it again until they get the sound they want. So the actual sound of the bell comes from the moment after it's come out the kiln, and it's kind of re-hammered to get the right acoustics. And these bells sound so lovely. They're sort of not like that horrible school bell of the... They're sort of a lovely, soft sound. So this family of bell makers, they all work together and create these amazing pieces. And then, after visiting the copper bell makers, with our bags leaving all jingling, and our driver Pravin, he also bought some little copper bell things to hang at the front of the bus. And so then we all had, every time we went over a bump or anything on our subsequent drives, we've had that little dingle, dingle, dingle the whole way along. And so you can tell when you're on a really bad road. So finally, after that, we went to go visit the family of the Rogan art painters. And Rogan art basically was an art form involved, it was done by very poor communities, and it uses castor oil, which in the fields around where we've been, it's castor oil growing everywhere. And they innovated to find a way to use castor oil within art. And this tended to be from the very poor communities who couldn't afford to do embroidery, couldn't afford the threads and things like that. And so they found this alternative way to create art. And basically what they do is they treat the castor oil to create almost like a gluey gel, mix that gluey gel with pigment, creating this kind of almost like a thick paste. And then they lay that paste on, and I'll show you a video of them doing it. But the way that they lay the paste on in these kind of little short lines and the slight 3D effect of it from a distance makes the pieces look embroidered. So traditionally, when it was first done as a craft, they started it because it was a way you could sort of look like you had embroidery when you didn't have embroidery. It would be created with castor oil, created with the cheapest materials available. And so they would still be creating the same pieces that the embroiderers would do, you know, the large kind of hangings to cover over the kind of bed quilts, to cover over your kind of marriage dowry, things like that. They would still be creating that, but they would be doing it in castor oil and pigment. And so the very original pieces of Rogan art, which are, say, 60, 70 years old, you can see the difference in the colours because there's no artificial pigments in it. There's all natural pigments, and the colours look like that accordingly. Now, this art form completely died out about 40 years ago. And the family we went and met were the grandfather of the family. He was the person who has revived this craft. And his family had practiced it, and he brought it back, but completely changed the approach to it. So you can see in a piece of the older style, original Rogan art, quite rough, you know, loose lines, kind of. And then what they do now is use very delicate, a lot of tree of lives, obviously very full of symbolism. And these are very delicate, detailed pieces in these strong colour palettes. And you only have to kind of look around the studio. Every single part of the wall is covered in their awards they've received from nationally, internationally, But this piece, the pieces of art they're creating, have actually typically become the kind of pieces which are gifted. So say when Modi met Obama, he gifted a piece of Rogan art from this family, a tree of life from this family. So it just shows how much they've been able to turn around the craft and make it become such a high art form that this is what the Indian government kind of would give as gifts when to meet different dignitaries. So we met them, and the one consistent thing across all these three artisans we met is just the generosity with which they want to show you their craft, the pride they have in showing you the craft. There is no sort of approach here of, I'm going to show you this and then you've got to buy something. They are purely showing you because they're so proud of what they do. And the ability they've had to keep those traditions alive, keep them within their families, is just incredible. After that, we had lunch. I know you're thinking, that can't possibly, that's a whole day. But no, it wasn't. And then from there, we went on to Bhuj, which is another community. It's on the outskirts of Bhuj. And again, this is a much more kind of very interwoven community, part of Bhuj lifestyle, very cosmopolitan. And this community do a particular type of weaving and indigo dyeing, and it's beautiful. And I will show you footage from this whole process, but when you see the ones just of the indigo vats, it is an incredibly sort of beautiful process. So basically, the Bhuj weavers, we met one family, and they live in this kind of complex. And again, this art form that they're doing now and their way of weaving is internationally regarded. They are taking commissions and creating pieces that are going into kind of designers and shops all over the world. So they have found a way to make their craft very commercial and successful, and you can see that just from the way they're living. And when we were there was a whole group of students from the I think Mumbai School of Fashion there who had been spending a 4-hour kind of intensive workshop understanding the process. So this is a craft that's highly regarded and a family that's highly regarded. Basically, they do the entire process from the raw cotton to the dyeing to the weaving. So first up, we met one of the sons of the family, and he showed us how they do the kind of spinning of the cotton. And they work from a raw cotton, so what they'd call a black cotton, so it hasn't had impurities removed, it hasn't been through the ginning process, so it's still got the seeds, it's still got bits of husk. So they spin that, and the spinning is typically done by different communities around them. So they work a lot with the women of the Rabari community who do a lot of the spinning for them. So they spin these the threads, and what is very special about the Bhuj weave is because it's using all the absolute raw natural cotton, you get the kind of textural differences within the threads. So you see, and if you ever kind of buy a kind of, it almost looks like a linen, raw linen. This actually I'm wearing right now is from them. It was a Bhuj. This is a Bhuj weave, and you can tell this is a natural indigo. And when I look at it, you can see within the threads that they are hand spun because of the fact there's this sort of irregularity in it. So they spin everything, and then it goes to their indigo dyeing vats, and they have their indigo dyeing vats. They range between either 12 years old or 6 years old, and they've got 12 different indigo vats, and which they maintain, and each indigo vat does kind of different levels of indigo. And nowadays, with the work they're doing, they have incorporated other forms of dyeing, and so they do buy some dyed, spun cotton directly, but all the indigo they do themselves, and they do it from scratch. So they buy in the indigo leaves, because indigo leaves don't really grow naturally to Kutch. So they buy in the indigo, but then from that point onwards, they do the entire creation of the dye themselves from the raw leaves, and they do it using leaves, the raw indigo leaves, and dates. Dates is your fermenting agent, rather than, say, getting indigo cakes, which is the sort of thing you might have seen lots of places do. They here do it naturally because you're far more able to control the process and get exactly what they want. And he was showing us among the vats, they may only at any point have kind of 2 or 3 that are ready to go. And the way they test if they're ready to go is they stick a finger in and stick it on their tongue, and they'll be able to tell what the right pH is. So, that's the sign of people who've been doing it for generations. So they dye all the indigo themselves there, and the different colours of indigo are achieved by how many times they're dipped and dyed. Some of them are dipped up to 12 times, but also it's achieved through the different pHs of the different vats. So some vats are kind of higher pH and they take the colour quicker, and some of them less. But the point is, the dark indigo, and this is the same all the world over, dark indigo is far more labour intensive than light indigo, and so dark indigo is a much bigger signifier of wealth than light indigo. So from that point, then it goes on and they weave it into these beautiful either fabrics, kind of running fabric, like fabric by the meter you'd make in clothing, or into shawls, scarves, saris, or they work with kind of regional designers or international designers doing everything from bedspreads, cushions, things like that. And so we went and met some of the different members of the family on 2 different types of looms. One's called pit looms, and one's that is the standard kind of floor loom. And on the pit loom, they're doing simpler things, and on the floor loom, they're doing the far more complicated stuff. So we saw this weaving process, and it's quite a different weaving process to the Patona weavers we'd met before. The weaving we'd seen before was the much more very kind of detailed, very intricate dyeing process. This is working with pre-dyed cottons and then creating the pattern in a more classical weaving manner. So that was our last day in Bhuj. All we did the next day was we went from Bhuj and we transferred to Muli, and that was about a 6-hour drive. So it was 6 hours on the road, and then we arrived at the most amazing place where we're staying in Muli, and it's a kind of old palace. And we arrived at about 2 o'clock, and we had the then entire rest of the day just lying in the garden here. And the days in Bhuj were the most incredible, so informative. We've learned so much, but also there's so much to take in, and meeting so many different makers, you want the time to absorb things. And so having then a day of rest, a day with nothing new to absorb, just gave us that time to kind of really start appreciating what we've seen. Sorry, there's very loud birds here, so if you can hear a lot of background noise, that's the birds. And then yesterday was our final day, and again it was a slightly more relaxed day, but what we had the privilege of doing was going to see the entire cotton process from the very beginning to the final product. And I wear a lot of cotton, I use a lot of cotton in my embroidery, but I've never ever seen the process of cotton making before. So we started the morning by going out and meeting the cotton pickers in a nearby on a nearby cotton farm, meeting them, finding out about them, having a go at picking cotton ourselves, seeing the cotton flower, seeing how it becomes what it becomes. Now this year there's been very unseasonal rain, so quite late on in the season there's been a lot of rain, so it hasn't been a great year for the harvest, and they were saying actually it's almost 50% down, and obviously that impacts everyone across the supply chain that we met today. So we went and saw the cotton pickers in the field, and they have a lot of different people come from all over in order to do the cotton picking, but the people we met were all a local kind of from the local village, and they would basically have a kind of quota of they're going to pick that day. They'd probably be picking for about 6 or 7 hours, and they each were picking 20 kilograms of cotton. And then once that's finished, it may be that they either go home or they might be going to a different farm to work on picking something else. And then outside of cotton season, the fields are turned over and they're turned to maybe something like cumin, another kind of crop, in which case then the people who were picking these fields will then move on to start working on that crop, and they'll be seeding the crop and then they'll be picking that crop too. So we went and met them. And then we went to visit one of the ginning factories, and across the area we were in, they said there's about 5 different ginning factories. And at the ginning factory, that's where the raw cotton goes, and then it's separated into the kind of white cotton that will go into clothing and fabrics, and then the cotton seed, which in India, a lot of the cotton seed goes on to be making cotton oil, which is used in cooking, which I've never come across cotton oil for cooking before, but that's what it's separated for. And so basically all these massive trucks, which have gone around the various farms of the area picking up cotton, arrive every day. 10,000 kilograms of cotton are processed through the ginning factory when it's in the season. So they go the cotton all arrives, it's unloaded from the trucks, and then for the first couple of days, the cotton is left outside in the sun, and that gets all the bugs off it, and it also helps dry it out a bit. Then it's moved undercover, and it's moved into storage undercover, preparing then to go through the ginning process. It's kept there for another couple of days, and then it moves into the ginning process. And basically what happens is the cotton is put into these machines, it goes up conveyor belts, and then it goes through the ginning machines, which go through the process of separating out the cotton from the seed. The seed is then all carried one way and separated out to the front of the factory into these enormous piles, and the cotton then goes the opposite way to the back of the factory, where it is put into these bales, and each bale has 165 kilograms of cotton in it. Those bales of cotton are then either sent out to spinning factories or will be sent straight to fabric production places. So then the bit of the process, the only bit of the process we didn't see, was the spinning. And the spinning, while some spinning, like we saw with the Jodie weavers, is done from raw cotton in-house in the community, the vast majority of cotton is spun. It's a mechanised process, and cotton is spun from these very large bales into spun cotton that we would be more familiar with. So we didn't see that step of the process. But what we did then go on to do was meet a local family. Earlier in the trip, when we went to go see Gandhi's ashram, we also went to go see the Khadi Cotton Foundation. And Khadi is a foundation that basically has found a way to make communities still be able to produce cotton, but do it in an ethical, sustainable way that is accessible economically for people in India, which is where sometimes we fall down, is that ethical, sustainable tends to mean expensive back home. Here it doesn't. So basically what they've done, the Khadi Foundation, they have in local communities, they have funded communities to have these electric looms and get equipment for people to be able to spin cotton within their own community, and even subsidise then the electricity bills of those households so that they are not paying the electricity in order to create the cotton. And so we went to go visit one of these compounds, and this was one family. And basically what they have is they receive the cotton that has been spun. So they receive it on very large cones of cotton. They spin it down onto smaller ones, and then it goes through a starching process. And the starching process is what gives the thread its strength. So what you're seeing now is the full kind of starching process, where it's pulled across all these meters, because it goes through initially a bed of starch and then it's dried out. And so as it goes through the sun and gets towards the end, it's all dried. And then at the end, there is these enormous spinning kind of wooden big wheels, which are collecting together 2,000 meters of each section, which has 180 threads in. So it's enough meterage for then what is a bolt of cotton they're going to spin. So that, once that is full, goes to the electric loom. It's already got the 180 strands, which is what they need for their weft, the long bit. Sorry, my weaving terms are still not as good as they should be. But for the longer sections, they use 180 threads across the weft. And then they have these electric looms that are weaving the cotton into sheets. And those sheets then go to be dyed back to the Khadi Foundation. And the Khadi Foundation sells them on to people then at about a kind of 7 to 10% markup. So, they are finding a way to make cotton really accessible. I've looked, it's not easy to find Khadi cotton in the UK. But I'm going to do some research and see if there's a way we can start kind of getting that Khadi cotton, because the thing about that is what they've done is they've completely minimised their supply chain. And the supply chain really is cotton grower to family to Khadi Foundation. It's a very narrow supply chain to get to that point, and it's very beautiful cotton that they're creating. Now, this family was also doing some other forms of weaving as well, and that's something that over time they've found ways to start kind of incorporating slightly more complicated weaving into their process in order to supplement the family income. They're doing the large bolts of kind of raw cotton, but they're also doing slightly more decorative weaving. So this is my first time ever properly seeing the whole process of cotton production from start to finish. And it's definitely left me with kind of lots of things to think about from a personal perspective about the cotton I'm buying, the cotton I'm wearing, the cotton we're using, the treatment it goes through, and who's involved in the process. So I'm conscious this video is already, I would hope not to keep it too long. So the final thing we've done on this trip then is we then went on to another village called Vastadi, and we went to go meet 2 final weaving families. The first one are a very unique form of weaving called Tangalia weaving. And everything about the Tangalia process is like we've seen before, like normal weaving. But what they do that's totally unique is they add in this almost embroidered detail on top of the weaves by using a wool. They pull by hand wool into these geometric patterns in the design. And I was looking at it, it looks embroidered, it almost looks like cross stitch. There's something slightly, I would almost say there's something like South American in the appearance of some of these. But what's totally unique about it is it's entirely reversible. So you see exactly the same design on the front and the back, which would be something which would be nigh on impossible to achieve doing through an embroidery process. But also it's intricately measured. So it's kind of, it's completely geometrically measured out based on the strands. And because it's woven in, you know, that's not going to come out again. So this family, they said as a family, they had heritage history of doing it for 700 years. And at the moment, there's the father, the son, the grandson, all are doing this process. And this also is something that is only done in this region, but has gained repute internationally. And I think it was in early 2000s, they got a certificate from a GIN number, which basically means it was internationally identified as a craft of this area, so that no one else can do this craft and claim they created it. It has been given the kind of designation that this was a craft that was invented here. Never something I've seen before, and to be honest, if you just saw it, you would never appreciate the process that's been through until you see it. So we saw a piece that this man was working on, and he was creating a 15-meter bolt, and he'd been working on it for 2 months. So just to give you an idea of the time period required to make these pieces. So it's a very different style of weaving to what we've seen before. And then the final chap we went on to go see has started doing something completely different. And this is not a traditional craft, but he has started recycling old saris to create these kind of hard-wearing rugs and floor coverings. And he collects saris, cuts them down into these long strips, and then combines them together, use it almost like a rag rug, very kind of like we would have a hooky mat, say, in that same sort of style, but doing it on a loom. And he's creating these amazing rugs from entirely recycled materials. So it's only not been doing it that long, and it's a new kind of craft that they've been able to start bringing on and showing everyone, because it's such an interesting way that he's choosing to work in a way that's not traditional. So that was our final weaving outing. We came back here, we had watched the sunset and had the most delicious group dinner, and today we drive to Ahmedabad to catch a flight to Mumbai. Tomorrow, fly from Mumbai home, and I'll do a recap of everything once I get back home. So I'll do a little short video when I'm back home just to reflect on the whole trip. But honestly, it's been life-changing. So I'll cut it off there. Thank you.